The story of the Leyland cypress turns on the peculiarly English preoccupations with privacy, gardening and, of course, class. In the 19th century, when British plant hunters brought back the hardy yellow cedar from Oregon and the faster-growing but more feeble Monterey cypress from California, they had no idea of the mayhem they would cause more than 100 years later. These conifers are not closely related, and in their native habitats, 1,000 miles apart, they would never have hybridized. In mid-Wales, however, they were planted close together and managed to breed. The monster offspring is popularly called Leyland after Christopher Leyland, who owned the estate where the fateful mating occurred. Slim, upright and resistant to both salt spray and pollution, Leyland is alarmingly vigorous, able to grow more than 3 feet a year, often to a height of 115 feet. Planted in a row, the trees quickly form a dense, dark green wall. But it was not until the late 1970s, when garden centers became widespread and improved propagation techniques enabled Leyland to be mass-produced reliably from cuttings, that the tree became available to all. And that's when the trouble started. This is an edited excerpt from Around the World in 80 Trees by Jonathan Drora and illustrated by Lucille Clark. Lawrence King, £17.99, out now in the English suburbs, where people live close together yet have private gardens. Prying neighbors and being overlooked are obsessions. But the UK has planning laws that limit the height of man-made fences between properties to 6.5 feet. What the paranoid suburban householder needed was a living fence that would be beyond the scope of regulation and which would grow at breakneck speed into an impenetrable screen. Leyland perfectly filled that gap. By the early 1990s, half of all trees being planted by the English public were Leyland. Instant privacy came at a price, however. Neighbors discovered that precious little would survive in gardens overshadowed and acidified by Leyland. The angry occupants of lower floors complained of perpetual twilight. Adding insult to injury, Leyland was regarded suspiciously by proper gardeners as a vulgar tool of incomers and the nouveau riche. By the late 1990s, Leyland hedges were a cause célèbre. The media loved publishing stories of feuding neighbors coming to fisticuffs over lost light. Hedge strife caused a suicide and at least 2 murders. Illustration: Lucille Clark. One politician, representing the West London area of North Ealing, observed that, for those who were driven more by hate than a desire for privacy, Leyland had become a weapon of choice as much as a gun or a knife. Repeated debate and discussion of Leyland ensued in both Houses of Parliament. The House of Commons spent a total of 22 hours in solemn consideration. In the House of Lords, the matter was raised by the encouragingly named Lady Gardener of Parks. By 2005 there were more than 17,000 known hedge disputes between neighbors. That year, district authorities were given new powers to use anti-social behavior orders against nuisance hedges. By 2011 the total British Leyland population was a staggering 55 million, and by now it is likely that the trees outnumber people. But at least there's a rather British compromise between privacy and the right to light for now. Medical magic. Willow has long been linked to medical treatments. Ancient Egyptians used willow to treat fever and headaches, and in about 400 BC Hippocrates prescribed willow bark for rheumatism. In the Middle Ages there were scores of European examples of willow's effectiveness against fever, and a popular cure for toothache was to take a splinter of bark and insert it between gum and tooth. Illustration: Lucille Clark. Read more. What will England's new forest be like? We now know that willow bark contains significant amounts of a chemical called salicin, which can be converted in our bodies to substances that have analgesic and fever-reducing effects. This magic might therefore have worked even without the second part of the cure, which was to return the now bloody sliver to the tree to carry the pain away with it. In the mid-19th century, salicylic acid was finally isolated and turned into what is now a ubiquitous treatment for fevers and frets, consumed in about 100 billion pills a year. That drug is aspirin. It was named after another plant with similar chemistry, the meadow sweet, which at the time was called spirea, and Frank's favorite tree, horse chestnut. While the conker tree calls to mind playful childhood days, the horse chestnut is also an upsetting reminder of Europe's darkest hour. Illustration, Lucille Clark. Read more, How Tree Hugging Can Give You a Natural High During the Second World War. Anne Frank could see a horse chestnut from a window in the Amsterdam attic where she lived in hiding. She wrote in her diary that winter's bare branches, which would surely flourish in spring, inspired her with hope. Sadly, she was betrayed and did not survive, but when the tree itself died in 2010, saplings grown from its seeds were distributed as beacons of optimism and living symbols of the desire for a society of mutual understanding and respect for diversity. Nature's own insect repellent, neem. When an insect sees a tree, it doubtless thinks, lunch. Since trees cannot run or hide, they have developed many defenses against being eaten, and the neem tree has done so in especially lavish style. Its leaves, bark, especially its oil, contain a biochemical battery of insect repellents and steroid-like chemicals, which profoundly affect the life cycles of the insects that might attack the tree. Cunningly, these chemicals are not present in neem flowers or nectar, so bees and other beneficial pollinators are hardly affected. Illustration, Lucille Clark. Read more, City Branch. Explore London's ancient trees. Neem extract is so good at putting insects off their food that even a swarm of locusts will avoid crops that have been treated with it. Many species of insect would rather die of starvation than ingest the chemical cocktail, which disrupts vital behavior such as metamorphosis and, critically, feeding. It is an excellent deterrent to many flying insects, including mosquitoes, and is effective in tiny concentrations of just 10 parts per million. The wood that won wars. Black walnut. The black walnut has a long and varied relationship with the military. Its wood is solid, shock-resistant and easy to machine, and it buffs beautifully, with a subtle, raised fingerprint grain for an assured grip. In the mid-19th century it was such an obvious choice for gun stocks that shouldering walnut became a metaphor for army service. During the American Civil War, walnut husks were used to dye homespun uniforms a brownish-gray for Confederate soldiers and to make the ink they used to scratch out letters to loved ones back home. During the First World War, black walnut was specified for aircraft propellers because it could withstand huge forces without fragmenting. Illustration, Lucille Clark. By the Second World War, walnut had been so depleted that the U.S. government ran a campaign to encourage private individuals to donate trees to the war effort. Simultaneously, powdered walnut shells were combined with nitroglycerin to make a form of dynamite. With such associations, it is perhaps appropriate that black walnut wood has also long been popular for upmarket coffins. This is an edited excerpt from Around the World in 80 Trees by Jonathan Drora and illustrated by Lucille Clark. Lawrence King, £17.99, out now.